Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
We are going to be chatting about an exodus occurring within the Liberal Party after 5 staffers part ways, the Bloc Quebecois positioning themselves for a coalition with the Liberals, an ISIS member being caught in Canada planning the largest attack since 9/11, Edmonton committing over $1 million to an anti-racism grant, protesters getting sentenced to over 6 years for their role in the Coutts border blocking during the Freedom Convoy, as well as tens of thousands protesting for free speech in Brazil after the banning of X.
Hey guys, we just launched our Everybody versus Trudeau shirts. They're 100% cotton, super soft, sourced right here in Canada, and all proceeds go to support us at Blendr News and just sort of keep this engine running. So if you like what you see, head on over to www.everybodyversustrudeau.com and get your shirt today.
All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got a Liberal Party exodus continues as 5 senior staffers quit. 5 chiefs of staff from key Liberal positions have resigned, adding to a wave of senior departures from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government. This follows the NDP's decision to end its coalition agreement with the Liberals, which had shielded Trudeau's minority government from non-confidence votes. The resignations come ahead of the Liberals' fall caucus meeting in BC, where former central bank governor Mark Carney is set to speak, fueling leadership speculation. Some Liberal MPs are skipping the meeting, further indicating internal unrest. So, will the Liberal Party be able to rebuild its brand after the damage Trudeau has done to it?
So this is kind of interesting because the whole time, people like you and I have been able to sort of see behind the curtain because there's enough people that are providing alternative news, right? But people in the mainstream media, they feel like everything's okay in the Liberal Party. Sure, their pockets are hurting or there's not food on the table. So they are being affected. But if you just listen to the media, you're like, well, they're doing the best they can. So that's kind of the sentiment. But when you're seeing it fall apart from the inside, that's a very clear indication. Now, I'm not sure how often 5 chiefs of staff leave at once. So I can't really speak to that. But it seems if I were to bet on it, I would say it's a very unique situation because they're just coming up to an election. So now's your time to shine, really, in a sense. So to me, this indicates that there's very, very little chance that they will be able to rebuild the brand as long as Trudeau is involved. I think what we're seeing is the way that you and I feel about Trudeau is starting to permeate the rest of the party. And what I think you get in politics a lot of times is people just toe the party line, right? Because there's something in it for me. There's pay, there's X, there's Y, there's Z. Primarily pay. Let's just call it pay, especially in this case. So I'm getting paid X. Now, if these are chiefs of staff, maybe they're making a couple $100,000 a year. So they're making this kind of money. But if you see the writing on the wall, you already don't like this guy because he's buried the country and you have an intimate look at it because you're not an idiot because this guy's been in power for 9 years. So you can blame the other side all you want, but it's all on this guy. And if you're a chief of staff, you're intelligent enough to identify that. So then you go, okay, guy's an asshat, but at least I'm getting paid. And you go, just lost his coalition. Okay, probably not going to see an election coming up, but there's little to no chance this guy's going to get reelected. So do I want to go now and start my new journey, whatever that may be, or do I want to go down with the sinking ship? If I knew the Titanic was going to sink an hour beforehand, they said, "Do you want to get on a boat?" My wife and kids would be on that boat, and I'd be gone, right? So I think what we're seeing here is it's imploding, and as long as this man's around, no chance of rebuilding the image.
Yeah, it's funny. You see everybody just trying to save their own skin, no matter the position they're in. Because if you look at it from, say, for instance, Jeremy Broadhurst's perspective, it's almost certain that this coming election is going to be one of the worst the Liberals have ever had, if not the worst. And so, okay, even though, yes, he's getting paid and he's going to be quitting and leaving, giving up a lot of money, do I want to be in charge of steering the ship or at least giving coordinates? You know, he's the director of the campaign when it's going to be on my head a year from now, my career, my resume saying I was in charge of the campaign, which went into the shitter. So
because right now what you have is 3 successful in quotes because they're minority governments, but 3 successful elections. That's what you have under your belt.
Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if not, like it's okay, I got to give up a little bit of money in the meantime, but hopefully I'll still be able to have a career in the future.
Exactly.
But this just goes to show that everybody in politics is in it for their own skin. Like they're not, I think maybe like 1 to 5% of politicians throughout human history have actually cared about what they say they care about. Most of them just get into it because, well, one of them being that humans love status and being in a government of importance or being in a position of
people
importance.
Want power.
Yeah.
People want power. Yeah. It
And
helps.
so-
They identify and they value themselves. They give themselves purpose by having power over other people. Very, very weak characteristic.
Yeah. So I think that is the game of politics in general for the vast majority.
Well,
of
you know,
them.
I agree with you. And I think the biggest problem you have is it's top-down leadership, right? Because think about the difference between a corporation, like a private corporation and a public being the government. So in the government, from the top down, you have the man, Trudeau. Now, I can't say quote me on this, but I saw this. But from my understanding, Trudeau has gone from a $1.5 million net worth when he declared his initial earnings. So that I'm sure of when he started in politics. Now it's over 300 million, according to Forbes. Now, again, double check the source. But if you look, even if it's half of that, who gives a shit? It's gone up 100x. What are we talking about here for a guy that makes $370,000 to $400,000 a year in his salary? This makes no sense. So my point is, from the top down, they're in it for themselves. And what they do is they just wait until it's their turn. They pay all their buddies make their dough, they get by. And if you get, you know, it's kind of like you climb far enough up the ladder, but this power struggle and this opportunity to basically pillage the public tax dollars, it's just kind of, there's levels to it, but they're all doing it. But again, like you need a system. This is wishful thinking, but this is why I made this point back to sort of private corporations. So when I was my heyday in the restaurant business, I owned and operated. I lived there. I had the best staff in the world. They were like family. I didn't know a lot of them. They weren't like close friends, but you create those relationships. People would do and want to work for me and do a lot because I would lead by example. I don't shit talk people. I'm never mean. I don't yell. It's just not how I operate. Like I just know you can catch more flies with honey. So and I've always, like I said, I've always been like, I'll work harder. Let's go. So it creates a really positive environment. Everybody wants to be there. That is like the antithesis of what you see in politics these days. But if you want the country to operate properly, like a corporation that it is, you need to find a way to build this culture. But again, it's just so rotten because there's so much power, there's so much profit, and then obviously there's so much corruption in it these days. I just don't know how you get to this point. If you can, maybe not.
Well, and what's interesting is that you see them trying to make that thing where they go, okay, how do we redirect? And they keep thinking it's along the lines of, well, we just need to put XYZ person in this position and that person in this position to implement their agenda. But what they don't realize is that it's their agenda itself that is causing all of these issues for them, right? Like, okay, the Liberal Party is crumbling before our eyes, and so we just need the proper people to put the plan in place. But then you look at what the actual plan is when it comes to things like globalism, all of this woke identity politics bullshit, the net zero, etc. That's what people are rejecting. It doesn't matter who you put into these positions. Like you can see them now gearing up, right? Trudeau's trying to get Mark Carney into
he's jumping in
to strategize with the Liberal Party and become part of it. And actually he's become more and more active on social media. So you can tell he's trying to get into this role where he can be a front-facing partner with the Liberal Party. But then again, you look deeper into Mark Carney and who he is. First of all, he hasn't even really been working in Canada recently. So he's actually become the governor of the Bank of England in 2013. He's also part of the United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action. And within the Brookfield Asset Management, his position is as vice chair and head of ESG.
Oh, God.
So environmental, social, and governance and impact funding investing. So for anyone who's not too sure how the whole ESG thing works, essentially what it does is it gives think about it as like a woke social credit score, and then for your company, and then the higher score that your company has, the more likely they are to be invested in by these funds. So it's kind of a way to turn capitalism into fuel for these social and woke policies per se. And then he also was co-chair of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, in which he aims to bring together financial institutions committed to accelerating the transition to a net zero global economy. So this guy is just another version of Trudeau. The
100%.
idea that he's going to come in and strategize and
No.
here's how we turn this ship around. Here's how we save face and we get back on the right side of things. It's like, no, here's how we do what you're doing, but just in a way that doesn't get us as much heat.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you have to check a number of boxes to join the party.
Mm-hmm.
He's signed it away. He's like, yep, I'll do all the things you need me to do. No problem. I'm not here to change anything. I'm going to do exactly what you need. And my track record proves it. That's the problem. Again, like you can't, once it's poisoned, you know what I mean? The only people that are allowed in are the ones that are willing to continue to toe that same line. This is the problem that I have. I don't see how you can actually transition it. You could say party to party, but it's such a grassroots effort to try to build a party that will operate the way that a great private corporation does, with that type of loyalty, that type of ambition, that type of care towards your work and what you're doing and what you're selling. You know what I mean? It's very hard to build that. And you definitely can't do it by having, like I said, an entirely poisoned group of people, many of which are jumping ship, and then just bring in another guy that just has a different face. It's not going to work. You're not going to get anywhere with it. And, you know, when it comes to like, we're going to strategize about the economy, you don't use the same people that ruined the economy to fix the economy, because all they've shown is they can only make it worse and make sure that them and their buddies get paid. That's all this is. So bunch of nonsense. I hope they just absolutely crash and burn in the next election and get a wake-up call, because I think we do need opposing parties in Canada, for sure, 100%. You need sort of the checks and balances, but this would be a good wake-up call for how far off track they've gotten and what they've sort of become, what it means to be liberal these days has become.
Moving on to our next story, it's how the Liberals might survive until 2025. The Bloc Quebecois is now ready to cash in on the NDP's exit and potentially support Trudeau's struggling Liberals. The Bloc Quebecois is emerging as a key player in Ottawa following the collapse of Justin Trudeau's agreement with the NDP, leaving his minority government vulnerable. Led by Yves-François Blanchet, the Bloc is ready to negotiate support in crucial confidence votes, demanding concessions for Quebec in return. Blockhouse leader Elaine Theron sees this as a window of opportunity, as the Bloc's balance of power has improved without the NDP's automatic backing of the Liberals. Key Bloc demands include support for Bill C-319 to raise pension payments for seniors, greater control over immigration and compensation owed to Quebec. They also seek an end to federal subsidies for oil companies and increased provincial healthcare funding. While the Conservatives aim to force an election, the Bloc is focused on extracting as many gains for Quebec as possible before an anticipated Conservative government takes over. So it would seem that political favors from our Prime Minister are being offered to anyone who is willing to help him maintain power.
Yeah, so, I mean, the positive you have here, and there's not much to it, but the positive you have here is Trudeau's corrosive. If you know what I mean, if you get in bed with the guy, you stay in your own party, you know what I mean? And you're like, you might see, this is crazy, but the Conservatives, I believe, are the second highest in the polls in Quebec right now. They've trumped Liberals, which Liberals were traditionally always kind of number two. They get into bed with the Liberals here in Trudeau. You might see a lot of people in Quebec, if things don't go well, start losing favor for the party. And that's all they have. So it'll be interesting to sort of watch that unfold. The other thing you got to ask yourself too here, really is, does Trudeau actually need the support? Because we talked about this before. You know, Trudeau's in this position right now where he kind of knows he's sinking, so he's going to do everything he can to save his own skin and maybe try to rebrand the Liberal Party. Not going to do very well with it, but he's going to try. You get into bed with Quebec, like, not to be mean or rude, but the general sentiment for most people in Canada is they don't like the Bloc. They don't like them. They're not getting any votes outside of Quebec.
Just call it what it is. They don't like the French.
Sure. Well, there was a big separatist movement. Like, there's a lot of bad blood. There's a lot of bad blood there. So my point is, like, a lot of people don't really support or favor them. So you get into bed with the party that the rest of the country is not even a fan of. You might lose even more liberals. So you got to be kind of careful there. So it may not really be good for any party other than what they can accomplish over the next year. But you and I also know it takes a long time to get policy through. So you have all these lofty ideas, but the reality is you only have 1 year to get it all done. Can you even get any of it done? So what does that even look like? And then you go back and say, okay, well, will the NDP go non-confidence and go for an election? Well, no, because they're also in the basement right now. They're doing just as bad. I recognize they're doing better than maybe the Liberals, but they lost 25% of their votes. They're in no position to want to see an election right now. Singh will lose his pension, Singh will lose his position, and the NDP will be in as bad a shape as they've been in a very long time because of the decisions they made. So if you think about it, everyone that was involved, everyone to the left of the Conservatives needs more time to try to rebuild their brand and to try to generate more votes and to generate some support to just try to, at least, the long shot is they try to keep the Conservatives as a minority. So what I'm getting at, I'm kind of running out of air here, is I don't think the Liberals actually need the Bloc's support, because I don't think the NDP is going to support a non-confidence to see an election early anyway, because it doesn't benefit any party to the left of the Conservatives.
Yeah, I didn't see really the NDP calling that. Even you see Jagmeet Singh starting to run away from those types of questions. Anytime he's asked, he keeps saying, well, I tore up the agreement. It's like, yeah, but what does that do? What's going to change within your actions? Are you going to continue voting with them in Parliament? Well, I'm going to vote on a case-by-case basis. And it's like, okay, well, you're pretty much saying so much that you're like, all right, this was all just a show that we just pulled here. But going to that point about the Bloc and them tying themselves to the Liberals, that's where I look at it and go, this is a very short-term, long-term difference between the strategy here for the Bloc. Like, okay, you might be able to form this coalition and get some of your political objectives through on the back of that. I mean, we already saw the whole dental plan NDP kind of thing, right?
Sure.
So they might be able to force some of their projects through in the meantime. But yeah, what does that do to them long term? We've seen, look at what's happening to the NDP right now and Singh in general.
Right. You've seen what happens when you associate with this guy. You want to play the same game. But that being said, too, you look at what they want. They want pension raised, control over immigration. They want more compensation for Quebec, and they want more healthcare funding for provinces. That's all money out. They want to cut subsidies for oil companies. I'm not opposed to that. But that's all money out. 4 of those 5 are money out projects, and pretty significant. Country's fucking bankrupt. I don't think they're going to be able to support or provide income or support. Pardon me. I don't think they're going to be able to provide any revenue for these initiatives. So that's the other thing too. Like, can they even come to fruition? I think you're going to get a song and dance from Trudeau if that were the case. But again, I really don't think he needs to be in bed with these guys. I kind of get this feeling, Eric Weinstein. He wrote a thesis in 2011, I think it was, maybe a little earlier, on something called kayfabe. So the idea was that you watch something. There's 2 sides to you. You watch something and you're engaged in it and you play along, but you know it's fake. So the example that he always uses is wrestling, like World Wrestling Federation, or what WWE I guess it's called now. It's old school. So you kind of look at this, you go, I know it's not real. I'm gonna play along because it's fun. And what he kind of was talking about when Trump came along is that's kind of the space that Trump lives in, where we kind of let him say stuff like, oh yeah, big boy, I got a bigger red button over here. Like, okay, you have a bigger red button. Like, you're going to nuke North Korea. Of course you're not going to do that. But people let him say that on Twitter because they know he's not really going to do it. So you give him that allowance. You're like, it's World Wrestling Federation. It's fine. It's not real. He cut himself beforehand. It's the chair is not a big deal. He's okay. So you kind of know that it's fake, but you let it happen. I'm seeing some of that here in Canadian politics. I don't think a lot of people would identify it the same way, but we're seeing this because Jagmeet Singh, it's exactly what you just said. That's exactly what this is. Well, I tore up that agreement and I'm going to go case by case on issues and I'm going to hold him to account. No, you're not. It's not good for your party and it's not good for you. So there's no way you're going to do any of these things. Like I said, when I wrote something on it, I'm like, the only thing this was missing was him actually tearing up the agreement on TV and yelling and screaming and beating his chest. It's all bullshit.
Well, into the whole it's all bullshit thing, it's pretty funny to consider that they keep saying these things like, oh, well, we're trying to deliver for Canadians, right? Well, now they're potentially going to sign on to an agreement where they go, we're putting Quebec's needs above everything, right? Like that's the whole agreement. We will keep you in power if you make sure to prioritize Quebec's needs.
As long as we're a little more equal.
But what's funny there too, because this is, I made a joke about how people don't like the French. I think it's actually more so that the French don't like us. Like there's been separatist movements and stuff in Quebec for decades upon decades, not wanting to be part of Canada. And Quebec is pretty openly hostile to certain provinces, especially Alberta, when it comes to things like oil.
Yeah, I don't understand. They seem to have quite an axe to grind with this country, and I'm not totally sure why. Pardon my ignorance, but anyway, this is what it is.
I think part of it is just culture. I mean, this all comes...
Yeah, they're very protective of their French culture. I'll give them that, which is actually something that kind of appeals to me given how we operate in Canada.
But even if you look back historically, England and France didn't quite get along unless somebody else bigger came along. Like, let's say Soviet, like when the Soviets came along, or when the Nazis invaded France, all of a sudden it was like, okay, well, we should put aside our issues because this is obviously a bigger threat. But either way, like back, especially in the monarchy days, England and France, they didn't see eye to eye. And then whenever they came over here and colonized North America and they had their little separate groups, it was very much the same. Actually, even England and France fought. And also when America fought the English, the French were backing them, although it took a long time for the French to come around and start helping the founding fathers and the American revolutionaries. But either way, where I'm getting at is, it's like we're getting to this point where, okay, we want our needs to be placed ahead of the rest of Canada, but we also don't even like Canada. And so that's like this whole, that's the attitude that is going to be behind a lot of what comes. And so I think, how when you've got a prime minister who's constantly talking about, okay, we need unity and we need this, but then is going to make a deal with the separatists. Like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, he's already used their favor once in a vote. I forget what it was for. So this is not a foreign idea to him. But look, at the end of the day, Trudeau is not going anywhere until the election. He's made that pretty clear. Unless he might pull a last minute Kamala and throw someone else in there. That move might work for the US. They might think about doing it here. Until then, there's no chance. If for some reason he needs to align with the Bloc, the long-term ramifications of that are bad for everybody. And when you and at the end of the day, we need to see the Liberal Party, we need to see the left-leaning political ideology die in this country. It needs to die, or else we can't really recover. So it's not really a bad thing because he's not doing anything to improve his situation. If he does do this, these are minor policies compared to what he's done over the last 10 years. Let him have it because he's going to sink himself and the Bloc and the NDP he's already done. So,
agreed. Moving on to our next story here, we've got Islamic terrorist in Canada caught planning the largest terror attack on American soil since 9/11. Muhammad Khan, a 20-year-old Pakistani national, was arrested in Ormstown, Quebec, while attempting to cross into the U.S. to carry out a large-scale terror attack targeting Jews in New York City. Khan's plans, reportedly intended to be the largest attack on America since 9/11, involved targeting a public plaza near a Jewish convention center. He communicated through encrypted messages with co-conspirators, instructing them to disguise themselves by shaving their beards. Khan had been in contact with FBI informants and undercover agents since late 2022, discussing forming an ISIS cell to inspire global support for the group. His preparations included surveillance of Jewish events, acquiring weapons, and planning his illegal entry into the U.S. Arrested by the RCMP near the U.S. border, Khan faces charges in Canada and potential extradition to the U.S., where he could receive a 20-year prison sentence for attempting to provide material support to ISIS. So, Canada has now been used as a landing zone for 2 ISIS terrorist plots in as many months. Does Canada have anything resembling national security anymore?
It doesn't look that way. You know, when your goal is mass immigration, and you're going to let in probably 1.5 million people this year between non-permanent, permanent, and temporary foreign workers, that's the number. So when you look at that at 1.5, you kind of go, okay, well, last time you and I were talking, not last time, but recently, we found that they just discarded all the safety guards that they had for the temporary foreign workers. It was essentially, and I quote, a rubber stamp is what they called it. So they're just bumping people in as quick as they can. It's the same thing with the student visas. Some universities are just basically becoming foreign student diploma mills. I don't remember what the university name was, but they let in over 45,000 people alone, which is significantly more than their capacity. So you can kind of see what's going on here. And anyway, my point is this. We have all of these systems that are scaling up to let more and more people into the country for whatever reason, not really the topic right now, for whatever reason that may be. But the infrastructure that we are using to allow these people in has not scaled adequately. So probably half of the 1.5 million people are getting in without legitimate actual security checks, I would imagine. And if I were a betting man, I would say that the school visas are even easier. We know the temporary foreign workers become a rubber stamp. Even the immigration minister, Mark Miller, recently said, we know gangs are using our system because there's holes in it. So you put all that together. And you kind of go, all right, so you could safely say 500 to 750,000 people a year are coming into Canada without adequate security checks. And I'm going to say 0.1% are coming in that are nefarious, let's call them, right? 0.1%. And we'll even use the low number at 500,000. So 1% would be 5,000. So we're talking about 500 people that come to this country specifically every year to cause significant damage. We've only seen 2 so far. This is the tip of the iceberg.
I actually think that's a very generous estimate as well.
I like to go that. I like to go further
definitely
on the side of argue with me here. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
No, for sure. I'm just saying I think the issue is actually probably worse than that. And to even take it a step further than what you just laid out as well, it's not just that international criminal organizations take advantage of our immigration system. It's not just that this institution has become incompetent and these criminals are getting under the radar. It's that they've actually gotten themselves into the institutions itself.
Right.
So this is what Luke Sabrin, an ex-CBSA Canadian Border Security official, laid out, where the people within the agency were being given directions to destroy passports that could have been used to identify dangerous individuals and criminals.
Right.
And then also there was a human smuggling scheme in Quebec. And when it came up on their radar, the agency effectively just swept it under the rug.
Scrapped the evidence,
got rid of it all.
That's right.
And told people not to go down. So it goes much deeper than just mere incompetence. And so we've seen the depths of this are actually insane. So we've got, the Sinaloa cartel, as well as Chinese triad groups directly involved with our politicians and our bureaucracies.
Yeah.
Even to it's so nuts. We've pointed out before on this podcast how the head of the Chinese international criminal organization, known as the Big Circle Boys, he was operating out of Markham. These groups also own a bunch of really expensive and large mansions in the area, and they run underground casinos out of them, which they also use to compromise our politicians and honeypot them and get blackmail on them in order to then get favors out of them later. And then also, Sam Cooper just revealed this last week, where the head of the decentralization of where these organizations are doing their international money laundering schemes were taking place in Canada.
Yeah.
Actually, in callback to Mark Carney, apparently there's speculation that he came in when HSBC was going through all of their craziness, being shown that they were essentially turning a blind eye to this money laundering.
Was it HSBC? It was also TD. TD got some shit for that.
Pretty much all the banks are one way or another in them. But Mark Carney came in to help kind of clear away a lot of that bullshit. Whitney Webb was the one that pointed that out, and she's deep into all of this kind of stuff. But so to me, it goes much deeper than just mere incompetence, and it's actually at this point it's just hostile to Canada.
I think the only thing you can really hope for, and this is kind of a wild thing to say, is that it's not going to be domestic. It's not going to be local terrorism. It's about all you can hope for at this point. I don't want to see anybody get harmed. Obviously, definitely don't want to see my friends or my family get harmed. And it seems like, hey, they're coming to Canada. They're making their plans. They went to the States. That's not much of a silver lining, to be quite honest with you. And it's going to affect our relationship with the U.S. But I mean, that is the best you can hope for at this point, because I don't think there's any way to get this under control. I think it's like cats out of the bag. Turns out there were 50 cats in there. There's no chance. You're not getting one back in.
The only way you can get it under control is if something the scale of Nuremberg happens in Canada, where all of a sudden we're like, okay, the entire apparatus is on trial.
But the thing is, you've already got hundreds and you got thousands of people already in here that are willing to execute on these plans. You know there are thousands of people in here already.
Oh, don't get me wrong.
So
I don't think that's highly likely.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, how America and the Allied world dealt with, say, the Nazis after World War II was they pulled everybody in and said, anybody here that was in charge of in any position of authority is being charged criminally with this in international courts and stuff. And again, whether that is likely to happen in this scenario, that's one thing, which I agree with you. It's not likely to happen, but also in terms of what would actually solve the problem, that's the only, like, you need something of that scale, because like you're talking about, it's thousands, it's entrenched in these institutions at this point.
It's a generational problem.
Yeah.
That's actually what this has become. This is a 40 to 50 year problem. This is what this is. And actually, if you look at the previous ISIS case, well, take this for example. This kid's a 20-year-old. It's a kid. You're a kid when you're 20. I don't give a fuck if you're an adult. You're a kid. You're still figuring out how to talk. We've been over this. 20 years old. Like, are you kidding me? So they're easier though to manipulate as well. Anyway, my point is the last group was a father-son duo. The kid was also in his 20s. So this is a, like I said, at least a 40, 50 year problem. And it all comes down to cultural opposition. How upset am I with you and your culture and your way of life? And what am I willing to do to try to get back at you? And you just don't know, because the thing is, that is the variable that can boil over at any point in time, anywhere in the world, because we've got so many people here from so many parts of the world that if it happens anywhere, you could see it boil over at home.
What's crazy about all this is you point out the fact that there's certain groups and cultures that are just fundamentally incompatible with our way of life. And then it makes it seem like people will jump down your throat being like, well, you hate them. You don't care about them. You bigot. You hate. You're like, no. I'm pointing out the fact that they hate us. That's very different. And I can say, hey, I don't want any issues with those people. I don't want to go after them. I'm not in the mindset of being like, we need to go over there and deal with those people before they come here and deal with us.
Sure.
Anything like that. It's like, let's just make sure that we don't mingle these two groups together, which is going to inevitably cause a war. I don't see how people don't get this point. Like, there's literally thousands of years of human history to look back on. And for the most part, most of these groups which are beefing today, you can look back and go, they've been beefing for centuries.
Yeah.
So then you have to ask yourself, maybe it's not merely European colonialism that is causing these tensions and that we need to just lambast ourselves for being colonialists and then the rest of the world will all of a sudden love us. It's like, wait, in the year 1000, there was these exact same tensions between these exact same groups long before anything like colonialism happened. So, excuse me, like, there's got to be something here that we're not looking at.
Yeah, what I try to do when I have these conversations with people is to identify something in the opposing culture that they don't agree with. I find that to be easier. So you've got this bill that's being proposed in Iraq, which allows them to marry 9-year-old girls. And you say, well, why would they let them do that? Well, the Prophet Muhammad, who never made any mistakes, and if you say so, you get yourself in real trouble. Well, he had been married to a 9-year-old. So they go, well, if he's never done anything wrong, then we can marry 9-year-olds. Shouldn't be an issue. And then you kind of go, well, we don't accept that here for a lot of good reasons. That's not how our culture operates. So you can see that if you brought that over here, well, that might be a problem for us. So there's one. The other thing is you look at what the Taliban's doing right now with women, where they can't speak in public and they can show zero skin. And women's rights and a lot of other people are rightfully bothered by it. Now it's happening over there. It's not happening here. But again, that's an Islamic religion. So you look primarily at Islamic religion over there. So you look at that and you go, well, how do you feel about that here? You go, well, I don't really like that idea. That doesn't really work for me. Okay, well, now you're starting to get the picture. It's not that you don't have to say they're bad people and you don't have to dislike them, but our cultures are very, very opposed in a lot of ways. Not just in terms of like human rights or violence, but like you look at things like that and you go, well, what if they want to marry your 9-year-old? Tell you that's not going to go well. So you know, I feel like that is a better way to try to at least help people understand that this is going to be a problem, because the opposition in cultural values versus because I can't think of any better way to sort of do it. Unfortunately, and to your point, a lot of times people are aligned with these causes for ideological purposes and don't really understand them very well. So you need to make the leap that people actually have to deeply understand what they're talking about. But if they do, I kind of think that's the best approach to explain to people the trouble that's a brewing.
Yeah. And it is that point about where they do contradict. It's funny seeing it now, right? We've even seen a couple where there's certain townships that are predominantly Muslim. There was one in upstate New York, I believe it was, or Michigan. And then there was also one out west where they started rejecting all of the LGBTQ stuff, right? And then all of a sudden you've got Trudeau claiming that the Islamic community is starting to become brainwashed by alt-right propaganda or whatever, right? They're like, falling prey to alt-right propaganda. You're like, no. You're
just a moron.
Yeah.
Jesus.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Edmonton commits over $1 million to anti-racism grant program. The city of Edmonton is allocating $1.395 million in taxpayer funds to its anti-racism grant program aimed at addressing systemic racial inequalities. The program, open to nonprofit organizations, focuses on areas like mental health, employment, education, disabilities, and food security. Applicants must specify their sector and use the funds to promote reconciliation and address racism. The city notes that non-Indigenous, non-Black, or non-racialized applicants are less likely to receive funding. This initiative comes as residents voice concerns over the city's financial management. Edmonton recently saw its highest property tax increase in over a decade at 8.7%, following overspending on $82 million worth of electric vehicles. Critics argue that this has strained the budget for essential services like transit and homeless shelters, leading to calls for changes in city leadership to address these financial challenges. So let me get this straight. To stop racism, we're going to start governing based on races.
And we're only going to let the people that are not white do the governing. Yeah. They're the only ones that can have the money.
I love how they say non-racialized. Like, isn't everybody part of a race at one point? Like, you're like,
this is ridiculous. Like I said, you can't continue to run a party on virtue signaling, and that's exactly what this is. You kind of go, well, we're in debt. Things aren't going well. We have to increase taxes. Okay, what can we do to combat that? How about $1.4 million for racism? That'll get everybody excited. They do these things to try to champion these groups of people to try to generate votes. And maybe they just go, look, I don't know how else we're going to generate any support at this point because we buried this country. So what are our options here? We'll try to give favor to some people. Okay, but it also has to align with liberal values. Okay, I got it. And this is what they come up with. This is the fucking nonsense they come up with. I don't know. I don't know what else to say.
Are you familiar with Carl Jung's concept of the shadow?
No.
So the shadow would be your undesirable traits that are unconscious to you.
Okay.
So that you're not aware of.
Yep.
And one thing that he pointed out when it comes to people's shadow is that that's often what triggers their negative emotion in the real world around them. So
right.
For instance, somebody might be a very angry and rude person, and you'll see them constantly get upset at angry and rude people. There's an instance of, it's actually pretty funny. It's this old lady giving an interview, and she was one of Jung's patients. And she asked Jung, she goes, "Why is everyone mad at me all the time?" And he goes, "Have you asked yourself why you're mad at people all the time?" And then she got up and stormed out and left the interview. And then she's like, "It took me about 5 years, but I realized he was right, that people were just matching me how I was meeting them."
Like attracts like.
Yeah. And so where I'm going with this is that the reason that he was pointing out about the shadow and why you see these things in the outside world but not yourself is that's your mind subconsciously trying to make you aware of this trait to deal with it within yourself.
Interesting.
And so when you see them get very obsessed about racism, you're like, are you guys just not willing to admit you're the racists here yet? like because you look at it and you go, okay,
yeah.
racism is so bad, but if you're colorblind, you're racist, and everything needs to be about race, and we need to look at everything through this lens of race. And you're like, I think you just might not be willing to admit that you're the only person still hung up on this. And what's funny is I believe it was Yale, but there was actually a study done which found that white liberals talk to minority. They change their tone of voice to as if they're talking to children when they talk to these minority groups. So you're like, you guys are actually very much like exactly what you claim to be fighting.
It's interesting. They so divide by promoting racial divide. That's exactly what this is. I was talking to my barber the other day, he's a Jamaican dude, and him and I have super interesting political chats. Seem to do that with everybody. So we're chatting, and one of the things that I kind of identified, like no one in my family's, like, I don't care what people say. Oh, if you're not this, you're that. No one in my family's racist. So I grew up my whole life seeing everybody equally in the same. So my sort of feeling with life, and this wasn't something I taught myself. This is how I see the world, I swear. I don't think anybody's better than me. I don't think I'm better than anybody. I think people have equal value. That's just how I've seen human life forever. I didn't know any other way. I've never thought because of race that there was any significant difference between anybody. So it literally never played a big role in my life. And people can go, oh, you're privileged, you're this, you're that. Hey, look, I'm not saying people don't have it hard. I'm saying it was never prevalent, and I never treated anybody differently, just like all these liberals are now doing. But then him and I were talking about is now the Liberal Party over the last 10 years or so has brought racism and put it on the forefront again and divided everyone. And they've recreated the problem from the 50s, 60s, whenever it was bad. They've kind of got back to the same situation, but it's their fault because most people are just like me, where they don't really think anybody's better or worse. They don't really care what color you are. They don't give a shit. It was never part of the conversation. Stop making me try to obsess about it. I actually just don't care. I just treat everybody well. And it's so weird that that's not acceptable. You know what I mean? It's such a broken system. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm sort of adding to your point in a different way. But I just feel like you do things like this and you create these programs and all you're doing is making things worse. That's all you're doing.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got protesters get 6.5-year sentences for roles in the Coutts border blockade. Two men, Anthony Oleynik and Chris Carbet, have been sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for their roles in the 2022 blockade of the Canada-US border crossing at Coutts, Alberta. The protest, which lasted 2 weeks, was in opposition to COVID-19 restrictions and vaccine mandates. Both men were convicted of mischief and possession of a firearm dangerous to the public, with Oleynik also found guilty of possessing a pipe bomb. Justice David Lebrenz acknowledged that their cause was just, but emphasized that Oleynik and Carbet could not be allowed to take the law into their own hands. Despite their sentences, neither will serve the full term, as they received nearly 4 years of credit for time already spent in custody. They were acquitted of the more serious charge of conspiracy to murder police officers. I've noticed a lot of pro-freedom convoy types complaining about this sentencing. However, it seems kind of reasonable to me. Am I missing something?
No, it is. I think people just lump it in with the freedom convoy, even though it wasn't even in the same area. But that's kind of what it gets lumped in with. You got weapons charges. You got a guy with a pipe bomb. You know, like what do you? This is how this is going to go. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a good representation of what the trucker convoy was like whatsoever. And I do think that the media will probably weaponize this, like you saw with that stupid thing that our tax dollars paid for that was on CBC, where they replayed the freedom convoy like Oompa Loompas.
Right.
So they'll sensationalize this. They'll make it seem like these crazy alt-right XYZ blah, blah, blah. When you objectively take a look at it, it doesn't seem that far out of the realm of reasonable. Maybe it's a little long. I don't know. I mean, they both got 6.5 years and one guy had a pipe bomb. I'm not exactly sure how these things get decided. I don't know what their previous records were. But no, it doesn't seem wildly unreasonable to me. It doesn't. I mean, they also got the 4 years for time already served, so they'll be back in society in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think, this is important to point out that no matter what the cause is, anytime there is large protests occurring, there will be bad actors that find themselves in the midst of it, whether it's the pro-Palestine stuff, whether it's the Freedom Convoy, all of this. But what defines that movement or that protest is how the larger group deals with those bad actors. So if the group polices itself, then I think that that's a respectable movement. And we saw that that's what the Freedom Convoy did in large.
Agreed.
You know, when, especially in Ottawa, when the guy showed up with the Confederate flag, which was more or less likely a plant. They kicked him out. And same thing with the whole, although the Nazi flag was never really even in the midst of it.
That was wasn't that one that
that was definitely
Trudeau's photographer was the guy that snapped the photo like 6 blocks away from the protest?
Yeah.
On a building that was apparently being occupied by government employees at the time. Yeah, cool. Good one.
But even too, you look at, ones that definitely weren't plants, like say the one guy that was urinating on a war memorial.
Could have
it's
been
like,
planted.
Maybe. But even after that, the protesters then started cleaning all of the memorials around the city and stuff, right? So that is how a protest should behave. And actually, I think it was Tamara Litch who said that they were even kind of aware that some bad actors were starting to find their way into the midst. And that's kind of why they called it. Yeah. Because they were like, let's just call this before these people actually start being able to carry out their agenda with ours. So I think that's actually what makes the Freedom Convoy great, is not the fact that, yes, there are a few crazy people like this guy. Like, yeah, if you're there making pipe bombs, and you know, I don't know whether he actually brought it to the protest or not.
He was found guilty of possessing a pipe bomb.
But whether that was possession at home or not,
probably not. Maybe, but I mean,
like, potentially you could have a pipe bomb at home. It doesn't matter.
Potentially.
But either way, you're setting yourself up for that. And so I don't think that this is unjustified that those guys would be.
The other thing too is to consider is that it was the Canada-US border crossing.
Yeah.
You can protest, but you can understand that blocking a border, you know, if you're not government official, you can understand how that's going to cause you some grief. Like I don't know the protest laws well enough, but I'm pretty sure that breaches them. You know what I mean? Blocking borders. I mean, to me, it seems like the same thing as the university students, you know, at the, you know, college university students protesting Palestine and blocking up, you know, putting encampments on the campuses. It's like, you can't do that. That's actually unacceptable. You can protest on public property, you can, but I'm not sure about blocking the Canada-US border. I would imagine that there are some safeguards in place that you can't do that. Otherwise, you'd probably see them a lot more often, like actually blocking traffic and not letting people through at border crossings. I would imagine. I don't know.
Well, I'm actually pretty sure the Palestinians tried to do that down in Niagara recently, and the cops stopped them from being able to do it.
But, there you go. Yeah.
But either way, I think it more or less depends on, because I mean, at the end of the day, when you're trying to protest, you're trying to get in people's way.
Sure,
but you have to be doing it to the right people.
Well, okay, I hear you, but hear me out. You don't do it in front of a hospital unless you're a real piece of shit.
Yeah.
So it's that same thing. It's that same idea where it's like, you know, if you can't do it there, then why would you be able to do it? You know what I mean? All I'm saying is I believe that there must be some zones that are sort of like, oh no, you can't do it here. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't be able to do it on a military base. They'd be like, I'll shoot you, get out of here. So it's like, sure, it's government property, but if you protest there, you're probably gonna get blasted. So I imagine there's some zones that it's like, no, you just can't do it here. Like more like a national security thing. You know what I mean?
Well, I agree with, say, certain emergency stuff. Like, yeah, like you shouldn't be able to block a hospital from people being able to get medical treatment and that kind of stuff. I could definitely see something there. On the border front, I don't know whether that would be quote unquote like as dangerous enough. You're not threatening life per se.
I'm not sure that it's as dangerous, but I would, if there are, I mean, we can sort of agree that we've sort of backed into the idea that there are some safe zones that you can't do it, right? So that being the case, I would imagine a border is one of them because the government has to keep them secure, right? So that's a government job, is securing your border. So I would imagine that falls under it. I don't know. I'll have to look it up.
Either way, how that protest ended up going down, though, was even that wasn't too crazy because, yes, they blocked the Coutts border. But then as soon as the authorities came by and said, hey, we're going to be shutting this down, you guys can either shut this down peacefully and, by your own hand, or we can come in with the necessary measures to do so. They shut it down. Yes. Like they complied with it. So like to me, I don't know. I don't think that's probably why you're not seeing anyone else other than the people that got that had the weapons get charged, is because everyone else kind of went along with the authorities.
Right. So the Canada-US border is not entirely off limits to protest in Canada, but there are legal restrictions and regulations in place that govern protests in these areas. Protests at border crossings are subject to specific laws, and disruptions to border operations, such as blocking crossings, can result in legal consequences. So there is a system in place that goes, yeah, you can protest, but off to the side, don't get in the way, kind of deal.
Yeah. Yep, that makes sense. All right, our last story for the day. We've got Brazil sees largest free speech protest in Sao Paulo against X ban. On September 7th, 2024, tens of thousands of Brazilians protested in Sao Paulo against the Supreme Court's decision to ban the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. Marking Brazil's Independence Day, it was the largest protest against censorship in the country, with many attendees wearing Brazil's green and yellow and calling for the impeachment of Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes, who led the ban. Elon Musk, owner of X, has opposed the government's efforts to moderate content, accusing de Moraes of censorship after the judge ordered X to block accounts accused of spreading misinformation. Musk refused to comply, leading to daily fines for VPN users and orders to shut down X in Brazil. Supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro were prominent at the protest, waving signs like "Thank you, Elon Musk," and pushing for de Moraes' impeachment, accusing him of attacking free speech. So with the way that things are going, we see similar things happening in the UK, and then also Trudeau's Bill C-63 legislation in place. Is free speech going to become a major issue globally?
Yes, 100%. It already has. So what you're seeing is Brazil joined the censorship industrial complex. They joined the countries like the United States, like the UK, a lot of countries from the East that are already doing it in their own way. And you mentioned last time that this is sort of a NATO and a UN initiative. You've got the censorship agenda, the misinformation, disinformation. That bill was put forth by Canada in partnership, I believe, with the Netherlands, and that was submitted to the UN. The UN's now the one that has disseminated this. This is now, if you're part of the UN, you have to sort of enforce your own misinformation, disinformation strategies. So they're all over it, global, top down. It's just a matter of how they do it, when they do it, and what these adjustments look like. And when you think about something like this, you go, okay, misinformation, disinformation, what does that mean? So it's anything the government basically doesn't agree with. You'll have the definition better than me. I remember you said it last time. It was quite good. But the idea is basically information they don't agree with, because I think we can say the largest proprietors of misinformation through COVID was the government. But they're the ones that get to enforce these rules. That's insane. So again, when you think about what are the tools that you can use to spread misinformation or disinformation, well, you've got social media, you've got the mainstream media, you've got radio, you've got television, and then you've got these chat tools. They either own them already or they're attacking them with veracity. They are on top of them. You're looking at Durov, who owned Telegram. He's in some shit. You're looking at what they're trying to do to Musk, because he's the only social platform so far that's not really towing the line. He's getting banned here. He's already banned in a couple of other countries as well. This may continue. The EU is up Elon's ass right now. And the thing is, they're making it untenable, financially untenable to operate, to pay their fines. It's like 6% of global revenues.
Yeah.
That could pretty much be their entire margin gone. So you just can't do it. You just have to tell them to fuck right off. So it could be gone from Europe, it could be gone from the UK, it's gone from Brazil, a bunch of other places. Canada would not be far behind. That'd be Trudeau's dream. You know what I mean? So this is a global problem. It's getting worse. The noose is tightening right now. And if we continue to vote in liberal politicians and democratic politicians that will toe this line in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't know what kind of communication we're going to have left that is actually going to involve free speech other than one-to-one communication. And then what's next? I don't know. Because here's the thing. It's a cat and mouse game. It always has been a cat and mouse game, right? You start the printing press, you create newspapers. We got to stop. Well, first it started in the town square. I'm going to hang those fuckers. See what I don't like? I'm just going to hang you. Got it. So I'm going to talk quietly in a little tavern. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, great. So we pretty much have control over this. Then you go newspapers. They start buying them all up. You look at radio, owned by government or large corporations that are in bed with the government. Then you look at television. It's called the mainstream media for a reason. It is all basically owned by government and large corporations that are in bed with one another. Same with Hollywood, same with the music industry. You kind of look around, it's pretty clear. Social media, they've had trouble with because you can't snuff out billions of voices. It's very difficult. So this is the game that they're playing now. They go, well, up to now, we've been able to sort this out, whether it be by hanging or purchasing these units, whatever it may be. But social media, we just can't get a hold of this. And then Elon goes ahead and buys one of these. Fuck, we need global legislation that can snuff this out because we are losing this free speech battle. So now you're at a point where, sure, they are going to eventually snuff out free speech on these social platforms, but it's going to become so obvious to people like you and me, to society at scale, at large, that they're going to have to use force to keep us quiet, because they're not going to be able to do it behind the curtain. A lot of people go, mainstream media, yeah, that's where I get my news. Oh, I watch the movies. I don't really think about it. I don't go, well, this is owned by the government. This is mainly propaganda, X, Y, and Z. But if they take away your ability to communicate freely on social media, everyone's going to notice. And I think you're going to have a really, really big problem on your hands. You're going to have you're going to have a do or die moment in society. Is society at scale willing to put their foot down and fight back? And this is something I think that will come to a head if we see another 4 to 8 years of liberal and democratic rule. Don't get me wrong, I don't think conservative politics are the solution for everything, but I do think they're the solution for this right now.
It's now not just looked at as like, okay, we are each our own individual nations in charge of looking after our own individual security. It's that we've got, for the first time in human history, a global order. Well, I guess, you know what, you could probably put Rome into that as far as like the civilized world, but obviously we're on a different scale than Rome was 2,000 years ago. But either way, this is the first time that there has been one quote unquote empire, which is America, that has more or less controlled the world. Like, obviously, certain countries still have their wiggle room within that, but everyone is very well aware that, like, don't step out of line, otherwise you're going to have Marines on your soil.
Yeah.
And so the whole NATO censorship complex that has arose out of that is no longer, okay, we need to censor, like, it's not an individual country that, okay, we need to censor in order to uphold our national security. It's all of these countries that are under the global order, per se, of America, under that umbrella. We need to censor in order to protect the global order. So now it's not just regional. It's not just country by country, all operating on their own agendas. It's, you've got this one massive global agenda.
Because communication is now global through these social channels, so you can no longer have it in these little silos. But my point about conservative and Republican politics was actually this. It's not that I think the political parties are the solution. It's that guys like Donald Trump, who I don't particularly like as an individual, but I think he represents what the United States needs right now. So he is not a part of the global order.
Mm-hmm.
So he is not really pro-NATO. He's already talked shit about it. He's not really pro-UN. You know, they may be pulling out, maybe not. Definitely offshoot groups like the UNRWA, they'll stay out of. He's not a big fan of the WHO. So he actually is opposed to global order. So this is why I'm not sure they can actually let Donald Trump be the president, because he is so opposed to the machine, to the one system that these people are fighting for, that it may actually, and again, like you said, America's the superpower, it may destabilize the whole system.
It will.
And people have said this. People that are paying quite a lot of attention to this, that are on the left, have said, like, oh, this is what this means if he gets in. So my point was actually individuals, I should have said more so, like Trump, that don't represent the global order may help us correct course. That's what I actually mean. Same with Pierre Poilievre. Now, everyone's going to say, oh, he's this, he's that, he's whatever. Maybe you're right. But he's singing a different tune these days. And he's saying the things that we all want to hear. And he sounds like he wants to repeal all these bills and not play these games, not play global politics. So I think we owe him the benefit of the doubt, because we don't have any other choice. Let's be realistic. So I'm hopeful that Pierre Poilievre sort of follows suit. If Trump and him both get in, I hope Trump backs out of a lot of the global order stuff, and I hope Pierre Poilievre uses that maybe as a platform, and maybe he motivates him to do it. Maybe he leads by example, whatever it may be, that Pierre does some of the same things, and Canada can sort of try to correct course. I don't think the odds are any better than 10 to 15%. I'm not delusional here, but that's, I think, our best opportunity to try to sort of save the mess that we're currently in. Otherwise, like I said, censorship's a cat and mouse game. We need to find new ways to communicate. We need to. Because once the social channels are compromised and you can't even use chat platforms that are encrypted, what's next? What are you going to do? I think you have to turn to blockchain. I don't exactly know what that looks like, but I think that's where the solution may be if we get to that point. But that's kind of a conversation for another day.
Well, I think the whole global order is going to collapse. It's going to end as we know it, just because of natural causes itself, like population collapse, which is incoming over the next decade or two. is going to cause the world to become more divided. Literally, there's entire countries that are just going to more or less fall off of the map. Like China is not going to be as industrialized as it is in 30, 40 years, as long as their population trajectory stays the same. And they're in a, like, I mean, I know we're trying to save it with immigration and stuff, but what's unique about China is they're a closed society, so they can't even pull that lever.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. And then what happens when China deindustrializes? Well, now you're almost the world's manufacturing base falls apart, and now each country. And anyways, so you're just going to see more and more things start fragmenting on the global scale. And I think what you're seeing is these things coming about happening naturally threatening the world order.
Yeah.
And then the people in charge of the world order, the NATOs, the UNs, the head of America, all of this kind of stuff, they're seeing it and going, fuck, all of our power, this immense power that we have as people is tied to this global order. We need to uphold it. And then they need to do more and more authoritarian things in order to keep that global order together.
Right.
And so this is what's scary to me as I look at it and go, we can either try to manage the collapse of globalism, which is going to, like, I see people
it's inevitable. Yeah.
And I see people talk about this online a lot about the ills of globalism and how we need to end it. And I it's not even that that's something I want. I just think it's going to happen. And then, but the thing is that I think people need to realize is like, that's going to come with a lot of problems.
Of course it is.
A lot of problems.
Yep.
And so you give me those two options. Okay, the problems that come with globalism ending and essentially everything we know economically also ending with that, because the last 50 years of economic progress around the world has been built on the back of globalism. All of that goes away. Or the other option is try to keep globalism, but have increasing authoritarianism. And I go, I'd rather the poor economic scenarios than live in slavery.
Well, I think the thing is it's inevitable. And what you find, though, is anytime a party has power, they will do more egregious stuff to stay in power, more authoritarian, more totalitarian stuff to stay in power. What may have once started out as a good idea turns into a monster. That's exactly what always happens when a party has power for too long. So yeah, like they're going to try to hang on to power and they're going to continue to do more of these insane things like blocking X and all these other countries kind of following suit and trying to snuff out free speech and what they're doing with Telegram and et cetera. So this is just part of their game. But to your point, the end of globalism is coming anyway. You're better off being honest with your citizens and giving your economy the opportunity to rebuild itself, to do more domestic production so you can be self-sustaining, especially in Canada. We've got all the tools that we need to do this. Why not bite the bullet now? And then that's something, see, they tell you got to fight for climate change, but you know that's shoddy science. What if they said, hey, here's something we need to work towards, people. Here's why I don't agree with raising taxes. But if I'm a politician, here's why taxes need to stay high. Here's why we're going to suffer for the next 10 years, Canada, because we're going to rebuild our infrastructure. Then we're going to have 100 years of prosperity. What do you think? They go, I can sign on for that. I'm here. I'll do that. But instead, they just try to hang on to power, bury free speech, and eventually this mess ends up falling on our lap, and we're just not prepared for it.
What's really interesting is you actually see the exact same pattern, this cycle, occur within chimps and their political structures.
Nice.
So when a new chimp becomes a leader, they often are extremely generous. They try to keep the peace. They don't get into power by being tyrannical. But then once things within the group start falling apart, then you start seeing people become like the chimps.
They turn into Nicolas Maduro. Yeah.
Well, they become disillusioned by the way that the group is acting. So then you'll see coalitions of chimps that don't have as much power start banding together to overthrow the alpha. When that happens, then the alpha does become tyrannical, trying to hold on to its power until eventually it's ripped limb from limb.
Exactly. That's Venezuela today.
But then, or even just look at it on global. It's like, okay, you've got the alpha of this globalist order.
Yeah.
And then you see the globalist order start fracturing. It's just not working anymore. And then you're starting to see these coalitions, which they're not necessarily coalitions, but you're starting to see these right-wing nationalist,
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah, opposing politicians. Yeah. Groups that are going, no, we're not here for this.
Let's call it what they call it. NATO calls it right-wing populist movements.
Sure.
Coming up and threatening that global order.
That's exactly
and then
what
that
it is.
global order is starting to become tyrannical to try to keep a hold on. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah. I use Maduro as an example because it's like almost a caricaturized version of it because it's so wild right now.
Yeah, insane. All right. Anything else you wanted to add before we get out of here?
That is everything. What's on the window?
I know it's fucking massive.
All right, it's outside though. I don't have to fuck with it. That is everything.
All right, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can find original articles, exclusive podcasts, as well as a direct line to Jonathan and I. We very much appreciate the support. It costs less than a pumpkin spice latte per month.
October's coming. Nice.
And it goes a long way to helping us keep fighting this fight. All right, we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.